hit this button so we can broadcast and people will be dropping in. It's going to take a little bit of time for people to drop in because of the hordes of people that want to meet the legendary Thomas Couetdic or Thomas Des Bois. So they'll all be streaming in as we go. So yeah, but you're feeling all right? You're feeling lots of energy, ready for action, ready to...
Oh yeah, always.
Are you going to bring as much energy to this talk as you do to your training?
I'm gonna try.
And I know you do bring a very powerful energy to your training, Thomas, because I've trained with you many times. So I expect the same energy in this talk, and everyone watching expects the same energy. So there's no pressure.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm going to pile on the pressure. So, all right, well, here they come. They're all piling in. So welcome again, everybody, to the Parkour Dialogues. I am your host, Dan Edwards, and today we are very lucky to have with us Thomas Couetdic, otherwise known as Thomas Des Bois, from France, who's tuning in from Fontainebleau right now. Thomas began his training with the Lisses traceurs in 2001 when parkour was still very much a fledgling discipline. Learning from the likes of Stephane and Johann Vigroux, Seb Goudot, Kazuma and others, Thomas also trained and worked with David Belle, one of the founders of the art. A few years later, Thomas was the very first French practitioner to visit the UK, creating an essential link between the original French traceurs and the nascent British community. He returned to live in London when he joined the Parkour Generations Team as a coach and performance artist. He's worked on movies such as Babylon AD with Vin Diesel and Michelle Yeoh, and performed for TV commercials and live shows for major brands like Samsung, Adidas, LG, the list goes on. Thomas is an explorer in the truest sense, so regularly embarking on epic, arduous adventures just to see if they could be done. He's motorbiked across India on a Royal Enfield, walked solo across Iceland, and cycled across Asia, to name just a few, almost never carrying a tent. Thomas embodies minimalist living, even breaking the handle off his toothbrush to travel as light as possible. Thomas recently undertook training with the French Special Forces before becoming a firefighter, and now lives in Fontainebleau Forest, where he climbs every single day. Thomas, welcome to the Parkour Dialogues.
Thank you.
So Thomas, first thing I want to ask you is about Iceland, because I know about most of your adventures, having known you for a long time and hearing about them endlessly. But I don't know much about the Iceland Walk. So tell me about, what was the Iceland adventure and how did that go? What did you do?
So my goal in Iceland was to cross on foot from the north to the south. So I don't know if you know much about Iceland. There's this ring road around the island.
Right.
And then in the middle, there's pretty much nothing. There's some like dirt roads and things like this for 4x4s, but there's no villages. There's nothing. It's just empty desert, pretty much like imagine planet Mars. It looks just like that, just rocks and sand and nothing. You know, no insects, no animals, nothing. And so I wanted to cross it and to have everything with me that I needed for the journey, and to have that kind of commitment. Like if I start this, then I have to go to the end, whatever happens in between, you know? So that was kind of the challenge for this. I didn't want to do something super long or super extreme, but I wanted to feel isolated in that sense with that trip. So that's what I went for.
And how did it achieve your expectations? Did you get the feeling that you wanted out of it?
Yeah, definitely. It was harsh, but not as harsh as some other conditions I had on previous travels. It was cold. It was freezing at night. It was raining pretty much every day. It was windy every day, so you couldn't really take breaks for a long time, like maybe 2-3 minutes, and then you have to get back on the road. Otherwise, you just get cold. So it was, it's pretty much what I wanted. I wanted something. If it was too easy, I wouldn't have been interested. Like I would have been disappointed. But I did feel isolated. I did feel like, okay, I need to ration my food. I need to make sure I can get to the end of this. Water was okay because there's rivers everywhere and you can drink right from the river. But yeah, I did get what I wanted. Yeah, definitely isolation and all that.
And how minimalist was this trip? Talk us through what did you carry on this trip?
So I had In total, I had about 12 kilos of stuff, including all the food and the water.
That's a luxury for you, man.
Yeah, yeah, that's a lot actually. Because half of that was food, like about 6 kilos of food, because I needed food for like 2 weeks basically. So that was pretty heavy and took up a lot of space in the bag. Otherwise, I had my sleeping bag. I had a tent for once that I never use otherwise. I've had that tent for 10 years, and that's the first time I used it.
Amazing.
And it's only because in Iceland there's no shelter. Like when you're in the middle of it, there's no trees, there's nothing, and there's not even a rock or something big enough that you can shelter yourself with.
Right.
So you need a tent basically. Otherwise, in other trips, I just find some abandoned hut or something, or cave or whatever it is, and I just sleep wherever. But for this situation, I needed the tent.
And you said it was cold. What temperature are we talking?
It wasn't horribly cold. Like it would get really cold at night, like -0. I mean, below 0. I mean, not extremely cold or anything. It was okay. It wasn't like Tibet when it was -20 or something.
Okay.
But it was cold, and the fact that you never have a moment in your day when you can have a break and be warm, like you can't stop in a cafe or something and just be warm for 5 minutes and then go on. So it kind of, like after several days of that, it just tires you out a little bit, you know?
Yeah, I completely understand. Cold, especially cold at night. That's the toughest one, right? If you get cold at night and you can't warm up, then you're in for a long night.
Yeah.
It's a rough night, and you wake up with no energy. It's very tough.
Yeah, I didn't sleep every night, like properly. Like there's one night I think I almost didn't sleep because it was just too cold.
Yeah, that's rough. Were you like starting fires at night?
No. I mean, you don't even have wood, so what would you start it with?
Okay, wow. So you're sleeping on the rocks.
Yeah.
You got a bedroll? Do you take a bedroll? No, I guess you don't take a bedroll.
Like a roll mat? Yeah, I had one.
Okay.
It wasn't thick enough because I was cold, obviously. But yeah, you need one. I mean, if I had to choose between a roll mat and a sleeping bag, I would take the roll mat because that's the most vital piece of equipment.
Keep the heat. Keep the cold of the earth away from your body. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So a lot of people watching this, Thomas, says people plowing now and are listening to this or watching it live on Facebook. They're going to be asking the question probably, why the fuck do you do this? What you do a lot of these trips, right? And you've been doing it for years. And a lot of people out there are just going to be thinking, why the hell would you walk across Iceland by yourself, sleeping on rocks, eating probably pretty average sort of whey rations that you're carrying with you, or cycling across Asia, which must have, taken a long old time, or -20 in Tibet. Why put yourself through this essentially suffering? Why do it?
Yeah. I think it's similar to why do parkour, why practice parkour. Like you put yourself in difficult situations and you try to overcome them and you grow from that process. It's a self-exploration, what am I capable of doing? What strength can I unleash if I really need to, it allows you to know yourself a lot better. I guess that would be the main reason why I do it. And there's also, with travels, you get to see places that are different from what you're used to. You lose your bearings very often. It's places that are different, that are maybe uncomfortable, or that don't have the comforts that you're used to. And also, I also see this as a way of getting stronger, because if you're strong only in situations that are favorable to you, I don't see that really as strength. Like if with parkour, if you do a jump only when it's nice and dry and the wall is very clean and all this, and you have a perfect place to put your hands on this, okay, that's interesting, but that's not enough. You also need to do it when it's wet, when there's ice, when it's dark, all this, when it's damp. Because you learn more from that, I guess. You push yourself more through that process, and you learn from it. And yeah.
Okay, so I get that, and maybe a lot of people watching might get that if they're parkour practitioners as well. They'd understand that that correlation between parkour training and these adventures, exploration. But what do you say? Because you also teach parkour and you have taught it around the world.
Yeah.
What do you say to someone who says, you know what, I know myself well enough without having to put myself through adversity. I don't need to do that. Like what maybe there's something wrong with you that you don't know yourself well enough. You have to go off and cause yourself suffering. Like,
Well, I don't know. I mean, how well do we know ourselves? Like, unless you're put in specific situations, you don't know how you can deal with those situations. Like, we all like to think that we would react in a certain way in a certain situation, but until you're there, you don't know. Like, if someone hurt someone I love, I would do this or that. Okay, well, let's see when you're in that situation how you react. Maybe you're gonna run away. Maybe you're gonna cry. Maybe you don't know. So it's easy to project yourself into something, into an unknown situation. But by definition, because it's unknown, you have no idea how you're gonna react in it. So only if you push yourself through these new situations or uncomfortable situations or demanding situations, and only then can you know what you're really capable of, and you gain confidence from that.
Do you think people don't want to know? Do you think people that resist that and stay away from testing themselves in that way and avoid that sort of test, do you think they don't want to know what they would really do in those sort of situations? They prefer to be ignorant, maybe.
I think to some extent, yeah, because I mean, when you start telling yourself, I don't know how I would react, then you're opening the door to the possibility that maybe you would fail at handling the situation properly. And that's scary, So it's better, it's more comforting to tell yourself, oh, I think I know how I would react in this situation, and not think about it anymore, So I guess, yeah, it's kind of a form of denial of some kind, like dodging the challenge.
Yeah. I think that there's definitely an element of that. Because as you say, it is scary. It's scary to face the things that are going to challenge you and test you, because you may not like the answer you find.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And when you're in hard situations, you're not always on top of things. Sometimes you're crushed by the situation, but like you have no choice sometimes. Like when I was in Tibet, there was the really high altitude and the cold, and I couldn't eat because I was just ill from the altitude, and I couldn't breathe because it was so high, and I was cold all the time, and hungry and all that. And I wasn't on top of the situation. I wasn't in control at all. Like I was crushed by it. But what am I gonna do? Am I gonna just sit there and wait till whatever, or I have to keep on going? There's no other solution. I'm in the middle of nowhere, so and you get through it. It doesn't mean you did well. It doesn't mean you were great and super strong the whole time, but you went through it, and that's what matters. You learn so much just from that. It's very humbling,
And what was the Tibet situation? What were you doing there?
So I was going from basically cycling from Tibet to the south of Vietnam. I was following the Mekong River, and I was 22. It was my first big trip like this, like big adventure and big trip really far away. And I wanted something that would really put me out of my comfort zone completely. So I went there in winter, and it was around -20, -25 maybe. The highest I got was about 5,000 meters of altitude. So that's about the height of the Mont Blanc in France. So it was pretty harsh, pretty difficult, and it was a lot worse than I expected it to be. Like most of the time I was pushing my bike more than cycling it because the roads were bad, it was muddy, or it was frozen, or with the altitude I didn't have the stamina to keep cycling. I had to just push and rest and push and rest. So it was extremely humbling, really.
How long did you spend on that trip?
The whole trip was about 3 months, 3 months and a half, maybe.
Wow.
Yeah, but Tibet was around 3 weeks, but those 3 weeks were probably the hardest time of my life, like harder than everything else I've done.
And what did you learn from those 3 weeks? What was the biggest takeaway from that? If that's the hardest time of your life, which is a huge thing to say, right? And a good thing to acknowledge. Well,
Yeah.
what do you learn from that? Other than
Well,
Tibet kicks your ass at high altitudes.
well, it's hard to say because the learning process happened a lot after doing the trip, and it took years for me to process the whole thing. Um, like I got to learn about myself a lot more about what I could do, and also I realized that even when I'm completely down, I could still manage to do things. I could still get to the end of something that I had decided I was going to do. That meant a lot to me because I wasn't very confident growing up, and doing activities or things that would build my confidence was a big was really important for me. It was like parkour was the first major one, and this trip was the next one. So it was a massive step in that direction of getting that confidence and knowing like and seeing myself in a new light. You know, like I can achieve something. I can do something, and that was on my own, and that was on purpose. I wanted to do it on my own. I didn't want to go through something hard and then think, oh, maybe it's because I was with someone and they helped me out through the thing. No, I wanted that strength to come only from me, you know, just to have that confidence from it at the end. So yeah, I guess that would be the biggest thing that I got is that form of confidence, which is strange because most of the time on that trip I was really, as I said, I was crushed by the situation. It was just so hard in so many ways. So I could have come out of it as like this is a failure. I thought I was gonna be strong, and I was weak the whole time. Like it was horrible. Like every day, pretty much, I was crying or like feeling depressed or whatever, like just feeling horrible. And so I could have seen that as a failure at the end, but I think just because I managed to get to the end of it, like barely, but still got to the end of it, that did so much for me. And I kept that with me even with parkour and with the other activities that I do, like trying to go to the end of something, you know, to really like this don't give up kind of mindset, you know. Even if you don't finish like really strong or anything, at least you finish, and that makes a massive difference.
Yeah, you've got. I mean, you've done a lot of these adventures, right? So you've lived in many ways a very sort of. You've got this willingness to embrace a very kind of unconventional life, let's say, these days. But you also do live in the real world. I mean, you do live a conventional life as well, and you manage to meld the two together. So how do you know when it is a good time to do one of these experiences where you break out of conventional living? How do you judge like this is a good one to do, or this is too much, or now it's the time? How do you know that? How do you get that balance right?
Well, it's hard to really know in advance because you're going in the, like when you go on the trip like this, you don't really know what it's going to be like. So it's hard to gauge, but I guess it depends how I feel, like how hungry I am for that kind of adventure. This will determine like how ambitious I try to make it. So like Tibet was probably the most ambitious one I've done, and because it was vital that I needed to go through something so intense like this, like you know, like I don't know, a life-changing experience, you know, something like this. So I really wanted to make it almost as hard as I could make it, you know, like that's why I went in winter rather than in summer, for example. And but yeah, I mean, how do you choose? I don't know, man. It's hard to you don't know what you're gonna do, so you don't know how to.
Is it a push or a pull? Is it like something, a journey, an adventure calls to you and you think, yeah, I want to do that? Or is that a pull, or is it a push? Like, I'm kind of bored with society now. I'm bored with my lifestyle here. I want to get out. Is it trying to get away from conventional living, or is it more this is really attractive to me, this thing, I want to go in that direction?
It can be both. I mean, it can be one or the other, rather. It depends. Like some trips were one, some trips were the other. So it depends. But definitely, the whole life-changing trips I've done were the pull one.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, something that's sort of dragging you towards it. Yeah. So, do you
Yeah.
think? And that's an interesting question, right? Is this again coming back to the idea of why some people do this and why others don't? Why few people do this and why others, and why the
Yeah.
majority don't? Is that pull? Do you think that pull is innate in people? Do you think there's some people that are just born with this willingness to explore, or do you think it's something that you were kind of exposed to, maybe at a young age, as a cool thing, or
Mm.
what do you think? Do you think it's something innate or learned?
Well, I think we kind of like many people like to do that in some way, but not we don't all do it in the same way. Like for me, it would be going out in nature and stuff like this. Maybe for someone else, it's gonna be like to become an actor and do stuff in front of people, on a stage or things like this. Like pushing our limits in that way. Exploring the unknown in that way.
Mm,
So a lot of people do it. It's just we do it differently, and maybe the direction you take, the specific direction you take, I would say maybe that's innate. But that drive to kind of push ourselves in a way that in direction that is unknown. Um, I think, I mean, because you see it in people sometimes. It can happen at any time of life. Like
mm,
some people have had a very conventional life like throughout their whole life, and maybe when they're 40 everything changes. Like there's some event in their life that happens. They I don't know, someone they love dies, or they get divorced or whatever it is, and suddenly they change things and they go on this big adventure or things like this. So that's definitely not innate. It's a decision. It's life that have brought them to that. Um, I mean, maybe there's a little bit of both, I guess.
mm. Yeah, I mean, I love this idea. I've always been really fascinated by the idea that humans are perhaps evolving, or human society has perhaps evolved us in a way, in a sense of moving us away from our kind of natural roots of dealing with adversity and struggle. So
Yeah.
there's this idea of like Homo domesticus. There's a great book by James Scott called Against the Grain. I don't know if you've read that,
No.
but he's basically talking about the idea that humans have become domesticated,
Hmm.
and that domestication has taken us away from our natural appreciation of nature and
Yeah.
our sense of exploration and toughness and resilience, and it's weakened us in a way. And that his view in the book is actually to do with how society evolves. So his view is that state-based societies, communal societies like that, moving away from hunter-gatherer wasn't
Yeah.
natural, it was enforced in a way. He's basically saying that hunter-gatherers lived a better life. Why would they move to an agrarian culture where they're having to be fixed in a place and having to farm, which is super hard work, rather than living a fairly free lifestyle as a hunter-gatherer? So whether or not he's correct or not, the idea that humans have evolved into a kind of domesticated, fragile state,
Yeah.
and we are now weaker, than we were, than our forebears were, potentially physically and physiologically and psychologically.
Yeah.
This is a very interesting idea to me, I think. And what's your thoughts on that? Do you think the majority of us are too domesticated now? Or do you think that people like you who do this, who are quite rare, I know you say like everyone sort of does this in some way, but very few people will give up their comforts. Very few people will purposely go, I'm gonna suffer for 3 months in the cold and the extreme height of the Tibet, and I know it's gonna suck, and I'm gonna do that for 3 months. Very few people do that by choice. There is a percentage, but it's a small percentage.
Yeah.
So do you think the other percentage, do you think we're too domesticated now, or what?
I think it's just habit for the most part. Like we have certain habits. We have our life and our everyday life, and there's things we know and things we don't know outside of that life. And I think maybe we're just a little bit scared to get out into that unknown because we've been used to certain things all the time. As you said, life has changed from what it was in the past, where risk was a more common thing than it is now, like physical risk and having to protect yourself, save your life, or or take physical risk like constantly. We don't really need that anymore. So we have this idea of safety around us, this like bubble of safety, and it's hard to get out of it. I think more than the past, So I guess that would probably be one of the reasons. I don't know. What do you like? Does that make sense to you?
Yes, yeah, it does make sense. I think it's. I mean, obviously, you can only kind of experience what you experience. So, as you say, we don't really. You're born into a certain world now, so we don't. Most people don't think about this, because you're not pushed to think about it. You don't have to think about it. But then when you do sort of start thinking about it, you do realize you can look back on history and look at where we came from, what our people, what us as a species were capable of enduring for hundreds of thousands of years, right? Physically, and now how in some ways how very fragile we are, and how very psychologically afraid we are of things that really are tiny, very, very, very small risk, and a risk so small that it's probably something you don't have to worry about. It's like a de minimis risk, right? There are many, many risks like this. So our perception of risk is completely off, and therefore our fears, many of our fears, are very, very unjustified in modern living. And yet those fears govern our lives. So and if you brought someone from like 2,000 years ago and put them in this day and age, they'd be like, why are you people afraid? You live an incredibly safe life compared to me and my people 2,000 years ago, and we got by, we found a way. So why are you guys afraid? So I think it's and we would just say, well, we live in a different paradigm. But it's interesting to think to try and step out of our paradigm, I think, and look at it in a meta sense and think, do we have to be that afraid? Do we have to limit ourselves to this modern paradigm, or can we kind of remember these ancient primeval strengths? And or have they gone? Are we different? Because there are some views now that we are actually physiologically and perhaps anatomically different from our more durable, older, thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago. That species of human kind of thing, we're actually not as strong anymore in some ways, and our immune systems aren't as strong and all that sort of thing. So maybe we are actually weaker. Maybe we are domesticated and fragile now.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe the common person is not as strong as our ancestors, but you still have people who are pushing themselves in certain sports or activities that are like maybe stronger than anyone in history, in their field. So we haven't lost those abilities. It's just we're not cultivating them as we were in the past, as humans were doing it in the past, because their lives forced them to cultivate those abilities. We don't need to be able to lift stuff and hike over mountains anymore. We don't need to do that. It's not a vital thing anymore. So it's kind of lost for the general public, I would say. And also because it's lost, then we have all these fears around it, like if you've never hiked up a mountain, then maybe you're going to be afraid to do it. Whereas if if it was part of your life every day, then it wouldn't be a fear anymore, and you would just do it. If you had to, you just go and do it. So because we've lost those habits, then we have those fears, and it's just holding us back. You see it with parkour, with beginners who are afraid to do a certain move, and then you kind of show them how to do it, and step by step take them through the whole thing, and they manage to do it, and now they're excited and they're empowered and they want to do more. It's the same with those travels. When you go on a trip and you manage to go through it and you see the benefits that you got from it, and you realize that, okay, now actually I could do this. I wasn't sure, but now I know I can do it. So some of that fear has disappeared. You've answered those questions that were part of the unknown. Now it's known. and so you want to do it again, and you keep going down that road. But you need to start going down that road to begin with in order to realize how beneficial that whole process is. If you stay with your fear from the beginning, if you say, no, I'm afraid and I'm just going to stick to what I know, then you're locked in. You're not going anywhere. And that's the problem with the modern life. It's locking in into safety, this bubble of safety I was talking about, this notion that, you know, we're fine, we have everything we need. I need food, I go to the supermarket, you know, I have my job, I have et cetera, et cetera. And we don't need to, we're not naturally pushed outside of those boundaries. So unless we do it ourselves, then nothing's going to happen. And we're just going to be afraid of these things. And there's going to be this unknown all around us that we're afraid of, and we're not exploring because we don't need to.
Yeah, so we have that potential. Which I agree with you. I think we have the potential to unlock the natural strengths within us, but many of us don't. Because we don't. Maybe we're not pushed to. We're not forced to. We're given a comfortable life to live in.
But we do fantasize about it. Like even people who don't do this, like a lot of people will like movies and things like this about people on adventures, and like
it's true.
Like even things like the Lord of the Rings, it's a big of an adventure, or things that are more realistic, like Into the Wild or things like this. You know, people who don't do anything athletic or who don't go on adventures at all will still resonate with this. You know, they like this because it calls to their instincts. You know. So even if we don't actually make that first step, it's still there, like a cat who wants to hunt, you know, but he doesn't need to, but he still has that instinct. You throw a ball, he's gonna go for it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, I completely agree with you. And I think it's a really good thing to expose people to, and to give them an opportunity to experience that nature within them. And most of the time, when people experience it, they want more of it. They feel
exactly.
like this is something I've been missing from my life, and I want to get it back. You know, which can be a really, really powerful, life-changing thing. So I want to go into your parkour training a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and I know you've been training. Your way of training is it's quite a tough way of training. Obviously, it's a very old school way of training, because you started, you know, really early in the early years, and trained with a very, very sort of tough, disciplined group of practitioners in Lisses. And I remember, you know, one of our trips to America, where we went over and ran a big event over there, one of the American rendezvous. I remember you were one of the coaches, and we took you over and gave you the advanced group. Do you remember that? We gave you the advanced group for like 2 hours one evening. There were like 30 or 40 sort of advanced practitioners from the States. And we gave them to you for a couple of hours. And all I remember is you disappeared off into the forest for a couple of hours, and then you came back, and they like followed after you, calling and like helping each other, and in tears, and basically they were like broken down. You'd crushed them in that forest, and they all loved it, but they were like, I remember these are like, you know, grown men crying after 2 hours with Thomas. So your training is obviously, and you were just like, well, I just did my training. So your training is obviously pretty tough, and I'm sure it's changed over the years. What are the things that you have kept from your training? What do you think, with all your experience of parkour training now, and your application of it in real world situations, like traveling, adventuring, and being a firefighter and all this sort of stuff, what are the things that you think, if you distilled your parkour training, what are the key components that you would keep forever, and that you would think, these are the things I should pass on to people?
I think the mindset from the training, like, I don't think you see it in everyone who does parkour, but definitely in the first, like, old school group of people, that original mindset, I think, is the most important element of it's not just pushing yourself, it's keeping open all the doors of what's possible, you know. That's what they were doing. Like the original guys, they were pushing a boundary. Like no one had done what they were doing before, or no one had done it in the way they were doing it. And and so they had to think outside of the box constantly. Like, there's this thing, maybe we could jump this. Maybe it's possible for a human being to go from there to there, you know? They had to keep that open in their mind. And so I really kept this with me. I still keep it now when I travel, when I do whatever I do, you know, like keep possibilities open in your mind, because like maybe you're going to do it. Maybe what seems impossible now is what you're going to be doing tomorrow. And this is what I apply in my life. This is also what I apply in my teaching. I don't do so much teaching anymore, but when I was, it was a lot about this whole mental game that's going on when you're training. More than being able to do a jump, you know, I don't really care about the jump so much. I care about the process behind the jump, and I care about putting people in a place that they didn't think they could be in. You know, that's why I'm kind of harsh as a coach. I'm not being mean. I'm just trying to put people in front of themselves. You know, in front of their own. How do you say, their own weaknesses, you know? And that's why some people break down, some people get upset, some people get angry. Not everyone enjoys this kind of thing, and not everyone wants to do it, but I think everyone can benefit from it if they accept to go through it. And so I don't see it as being a harsh coach or anything. I just see it as being honest with people and putting them in front of themselves, so that they can work on themselves, basically. So whenever I find a weakness in someone, I kind of like to explore it, you know, and sometimes it's going to be through a challenge. Sometimes it's just going to be teasing someone and trying to make them angry, make them upset, maybe make them not cry, but almost like, you know, push them in a certain, in one of their limits, and then work from there, you know, like, okay, now you're here. Okay, let's work with this, you know? So I apply this to myself. I like to apply it with people that I coach. And yeah, this whole kind of approach to training is what I kept from parkour.
How do you know when that pressure is too much? Because you're putting people under pressure right there. When you coach like that, when you teach people like that, you're exposing them to pressure. And pressure, you know, the right amount of pressure is good, helps you grow. The right amount of stress is good. And too much stress or too much pressure can be destructive, right? So how do you know whether it's the right amount of pressure? How do you keep the balance?
I think if people you're doing it to understand that you're there with them, you're not doing this to humiliate them or to, you know, to crush them. You're on this journey with them. I think it's kind of limitless, you know. You can keep going. I've never had someone just like walk away and like, this is too much, I'm not taking it anymore, you know. I've had people kind of snap or get angry and stuff like this, but it was more about, they were more angry at themselves than me. Like, they were throwing their anger at me, but I know it was against them because they could not do the challenge, they could not do whatever, you know. They could see their own limit and they were annoyed by it, you know. So I don't throw back their anger at them, you know. I just like talk them through the whole process, you know, and maybe, okay, let's approach this differently, let's do this, let's do that. But people don't really walk away, you know, when they understand they're going to get something from it, and when they understand that you're not against them, you know, you're working with them.
What if someone does walk away? How would you feel about that? Is that a problem, or would you just sort of take it in your stride and think, well, it's not for them? Or would you think, no, I must find a way to get them to experience this?
I think their walking away would just be like, to me, I would see it as meaning, I cannot handle this right now. I don't feel strong enough to handle this right now. It doesn't mean necessarily I give up, because people don't really want to give up. No one likes giving up, you know. It's not an enjoyable thing. You get nothing from it. Or nothing positive, at least. So I would just see this as like someone feeling not ready for it. Like they assume that they don't have the the proper strength to deal with the situation. That's why they're walking away. So I would still like make them feel like that's okay, man. We're just gonna approach it differently, or take a break and we're gonna work on something different, but we'll get back to it, or something like this. Like I never see this as a definite, like I'm going away and this is finished, you know? So as I said, I never had that problem. I've had people kind of walk away like this, angry, but I could always talk with them after, give them a few minutes, or maybe even give them a few days, you know, to cool down, to process what they went through, and then we start again. We were back at it, you know. But we ease our way into it, you know. We don't go like right away back into come on the hard stuff, pushing your limits and all. We go little by little.
And you've spoken before about a period in your own training where you got to a stage where you were sort of overtraining and you build up so much pressure on yourself that it caused you to kind of have a moment of doubt, and you sort of stepped away from training for several months.
Yeah.
Right. So talk us through that. What happened and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, so when I started parkour, I trained with the guys in Lisses, but then most of the time I was in Tours, training on my own. So most of my parkour training was on my own. I would get a lot of inspiration and advice from the guys in Lisses, but only when I was there, which was not all the time. Most of the time I was training on my own, doing my own stuff, spending a lot of time on my own, and pushing my limits on my own, basically trying to find new challenges in my town that no one had ever done because no one else was doing parkour there. And I started to get into this, to get the idea in my mind that it was never enough. Whatever I did was never enough. I needed to push myself more. I wanted to be the best I could be. Like I didn't really care about comparing myself to others, but I wanted me to be the best that I could be. Because I was pushing myself so much, but it was never enough in my mind, because when you want to be the best, as best you can be, there's always more to do. Like you're never like, okay, this is good, I'm fine here, I'll stay there. No, it's you do something, okay, that's good, but now I need to do this, you know. It keeps going. So I was in this mindset of I need more. And I didn't realize it, but I was just building stress, you know, from it, because it was like I had this very demanding coach behind me, like always yelling at me, like, come on, do more. This is not enough. You're not pushing yourself enough. You should be training more hours and blah, 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 you know. So I was never getting the satisfaction from my achievements in the training. And I was just giving myself bad feedback from my training, basically, because even if I did something I had never done before, well, I could have done it better, or, you know, or I should have done it sooner. I spent so much time on it. I should have done it sooner. It was never seen in a positive light. So this is just stress. It builds up. And the problem with that is that it kind of handicaps you. It kind of slows you down, because now you're stressed. Things are not just flowing naturally. It's just crushing you, you know, mentally. And you cannot do stuff as well as you would otherwise. And so that creates more stress, because now like you're making even less progress than you expected to be. And so it's like a loop, you know, and it's just horrible. It's just more stress, and because you have more stress, then you build more stress, and it goes on forever. And so at some point, like, so I was always telling myself, okay, I need to just keep pushing, just go outside. You're not motivated, you don't want to, it doesn't matter, just go outside, do stuff, do your push-ups, do your pull-ups, do your whatever, you know, do your jumps, do your like break new jumps and all this. Okay, go. But there's only so much you can take, you know. At some point you're gonna break, and the more determined you are, the more you're going to have to pile up that stress before you break, you know. So when it finally broke, it was like, I'm done with this, like no more parkour ever. I'm just like, I can't, this is just too much. It was a complete breakdown. Like I don't know, I didn't even want to go out from my room. I spent some weeks just being inside, like in my room and doing nothing. no training, no, not even going out for a walk or anything. It was just so like that pressure that had been so intense that like dropping it all, like there was nothing left. But it felt great, you know. It's like finally I have a relief, you know. I don't need to go training. I don't want to go train. Well, I'm not going. Great, that's awesome. That's a great feeling, you know. And little by little I got back into it after maybe a year of doing nothing, you know. I started going jogging and doing a few jumps, and I kind of made that decision that like from now on, I'm just gonna train when I want to train. Like every training session is gonna be because I want to do it, not because I'm forcing myself to do it. And I realized that actually I was making really quick progress. I was pushing myself in ways that I had never pushed myself in. I was unlocking potential that I didn't even like, I had never unlocked before. Just because things were flowing, you know, it was effortless. There was no stress whatsoever and no pressure. Like the only pressure was when I was in front of a jump, for example. I needed that pressure and I needed that focus. And so I was using it like a tool, you know. I needed the pressure at that very moment, so it was there. And then as soon as the jump was done, or as soon as I was home, then I was thinking about something else, and it was like no stress, no pressure. And to this day, that's still how I train. That's still how I approach the climbing, for example, that I'm doing. There's none of that stress that there was in the past that was just hindering me so much. And I didn't even realize, because I was in this this logic that if I don't push myself, I'm not gonna make progress. The only way you make progress is if you push yourself hard. That's it, you know, which is true to some extent. But at some point, if pushing yourself to that point goes along with stress, then it's not constructive anymore, and you're doing it wrong. And you should drop some of that pressure. And when you drop it, then suddenly things just flow and things just happen, and you're motivated. You want to go train. You want to train hard, and you're not stressing yourself. You're pushing yourself, but you're not stressing yourself. And that's maybe seems a little bit contradictory, but it's not. Like when you're in that zone, in that mindset, then you realize how great it is, because you're enjoying all the process. You know you're going towards a goal, but the goal doesn't matter too much. It's there just for the process, just to give an excuse for the process to happen. And the process is what matters. Like the journey, we always say it's not the destination, it's the journey. And training is a journey. Every time you go training, that's the journey. You know, you have to enjoy what you're doing. Otherwise, when you reach that goal, when you do that jump, it's not gonna have any value. Like it didn't have any value for me, because I was so stressed. I wasn't enjoying that process. Therefore, the goal didn't have any value anymore, even though I was reaching it. So yeah, it's a lot more about the journey nowadays. I mean, it's pretty much all about the journey nowadays, enjoying it. And if I don't enjoy it, if tomorrow I feel like I don't want to climb, I don't want to do parkour, I don't want to whatever, I just want to, I don't know, play the guitar or stay home, then that's what I'll do, you know. And I just let things flow like this, and it's unlocking potential that I didn't think it would ever unlock. So it's quite magical in a way.
Yeah, I mean, man, I think that's such an important point. You know, I think and I think you can only really understand that when you've experienced it yourself, or you see other people experience it. But I think a lot of people listening to this are probably either super happy to hear an experienced practitioner like you talk about that, or they are nodding their heads thinking, I know exactly what he's talking about. I went through the same thing, you know, or they're thinking, thank God for that, because I'm stressing myself out through training at the moment. And now I see that maybe I don't have to, because I mean, I you know, having toured around the world for however long, 15 years in parkour, and your story, you're absolutely not alone. I know so many very experienced practitioners that go through the same process. They train themselves into the ground. They push and push and push. And you're exactly right. The more you've got a stubborn mindset, like the harder you are to break down, the bigger the fall will be. when you do
Exactly.
finally break. So it's always, it's kind of an inverse relationship. It's a balance to it. Yeah. So the stronger you are, the more you will shatter when you do break, and the longer it will take to get there, but it will happen. And that is such an important thing for people to understand, because I think so many people go through that in parkour, such a tough discipline, and it challenges you so much and in such a visceral way, such a personal way, that I think people go through that a lot of like, I'm pushing hard and I'm not really getting anywhere, and I feel like I'm plateauing, and what's the point? And then they go into this negative cycle you talk about, of the spiral of like, now they don't have the motivation to train, and so they feel themselves getting worse, and that makes them even less motivated to train because they don't want to face the fact they get worse, and they and they spiral down. So that is hugely important. And when you come out the other side of it, if you come out the other side of it, you're right in that you sort of, all the pressure falls away, all the stress falls away. You continue training, but you train joyfully and happily, and you aren't as you don't have this the kind of zealous nature of like, I must go out and punish myself every day. I must kill myself with 1,000 push-ups and 100 massive drop jumps and QM for 10 miles or whatever. And sometimes less experienced practitioners don't understand that. They will kind of look at the more experienced practitioners and say, no, we've got to do the 1,000 push-ups today. You should know that. You've been training for ages. And you're like, yeah, but I don't feel I need to do it, because I've done it and whatever. So you kind of get to a stage where you understand that. You understand the use of that process, but you also understand the limitation of that process, and that you have to move beyond it. So I think that's hugely powerful, because that might help a lot of practitioners who are going into that stage. It might help them understand that, don't worry, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and you're going to go through this process, and on the other side of it, you will find a kind of enlightenment. There is a kind of enlightenment about it, right? It's sort of enlightenment. You're letting go of stress and pressure.
That's how I experienced it, definitely. Yeah.
And that's awesome. And my next question then is, do you think people have to go through that process of building up the pressure and then it releasing and being enlightened, or is there a smarter way to do it than the way you did it, and maybe the way I did it, and all the other stupid idiots from back in the day? Is there a way you can bypass that process, or do you have to go through that process?
That's a tough one, man. I think some people don't need to go through it at all, because they're never stressing about their practice. Like, they'll instinctively just not get stressed about what they do. If they feel like, okay, at some point I need to take a break, then they'll take that break, so I don't think everyone has to go through that. Some people just naturally don't stress themselves like this, but in our day and age, with all the mindset of like competitions and comparing ourselves to each other, and putting people on pedestals and stuff like this, and thinking about like certain accomplishments and performance and all that, you kind of, everything is encouraging you to go in that way, that way that's going to stress you. So, and the hard thing is that not everyone always, like, some people give up in the wrong way, like you can give up in the sense that you're letting go of that pressure and then slowly like letting things come back. Or some people, I guess, feel like it's maybe like they failed or something like this. And to some extent, that's how I felt also when I gave up. Like, it felt like I'm giving up, I didn't think like, okay, I'm dropping this tension and then everything's going to be good. That's not, I didn't see it. Like, at the moment I gave up, it was just, I'm giving up. That's it. I just can't take it anymore. Like, someone hitting you, and at some point you just can't take it, and you say, stop, you don't think it's all going to be great after. You think, oh, I just failed, I'm really happy I went through this, and I think in some way, it may sound mean, but I hope people go through it, because you learn so much from it, But do we need to go through it? Not necessarily. Some people don't. So I don't know what's their secret. Ask people like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't. You're the one on the podcast, man. I have to ask you.
Yeah,
So.
true. Sorry. Get someone better.
we can ask someone, next week or whatever. We'll get one of those people and ask them, why didn't you go through this pressure, damn it? No, but I think that's that's a really important point, man. And it's really common in the parkour world. People overtraining and push themselves too hard, and in a good way, and then they just go slightly over the edge from pushing yourself in a good way to starting to pile too much pressure on yourself to achieve stuff. As you say, constantly. It's never enough. You're never good enough.
Yeah, but the difficulty is that on the other side of that spectrum, there's like, if you're not pushing yourself, if you don't have discipline, basically, you're not going to achieve anything either, So it's kind of a balance that you have to find, and that balance is super hard to find. And when you go to the extreme, like I did, you find it the hard way. But I don't know. I mean, how else would you find it? I really don't know. That's the only way I know, is to go the hard way and break, and then you get it, And also, I mean, it's kind of like with the travels, they put you in situations that are unknown, and then once you've been there, you know it, and you know that spectrum now, because you've been here, and you can find that middle ground, like you know where you are on that spectrum, and you can value the fact that you found it, that you found that middle ground. So in that sense, it's really beneficial, like more than if you're just naturally just finding that right balance, I think, because you understand the process behind it.
Yeah, and it allows you to judge the limits, allows you to judge the extremes of what you can experience, and therefore you can sort of find the middle. So it's kind of a calibration tool in a way, I suppose.
Exactly. And you can see other people going through that process, and you can help them because you know the process completely from beginning to end. So that's as a coach, that's a super good tool to have, because you can read it in people. It's like so obvious, people themselves, they don't see it because when they're going through it, they're so obsessed that they have to keep training and have to keep pushing. Otherwise, they're not going to reach that magical state that they're looking for, But because you've been through it, you just see it. It's so obvious. I see it in people around me that I know, whether it's with climbing or with parkour. And but it's kind of a curse, because you cannot tell them just relax, take it easy. That's not what they want to hear. That's it for them. It's gonna be counterproductive. When you hear that, you think, no, that's the last thing I need. The last thing I need is to relax. I need to train more. I need to do, So that's the challenge as a coach, is to reach those people and to make them understand what you understood by going to the end of it. If you don't want them to have to go through that whole process but still understand the process, it's really challenging.
Or maybe you just go along with them. Like maybe you understand that this person is going to have to go through what I went through, but at least they don't have to do it alone. I did it alone, but at least I can share the journey with this person and let them know that these steps, these phases are natural, these stages are natural. So, you're not alone. Don't worry, and just keep going. Yes, it sucks, but keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And to some extent, I mean, sometimes when you push someone on a jump, like they want to do a jump and there's a lot of pressure, it's kind of the same process, but in a miniature way, because it's just over a jump, but there is this tension. There is, I need to focus more. I need to be there. And then at some point, no, just relax, just let go and just do the jump, and so you can kind of guide them, like make that parallel with them, make them go through that process within the jump, and then make them understand that, like, this is also the bigger picture. It kind of sorry, I can't find the word. I was trying to find a clever word, but I can't find it.
It'll take you a long time to find a clever word, man. Don't worry about
it. But yeah, I mean, like a parkour challenge, a really stressful or a really psychological parkour challenge, is kind of an image of this whole entire process that we're talking about. So it can be a good way to make them understand a little bit the process, because we're like through that.
Yeah, it's a microcosm, right?
Yes.
You're experiencing a much larger concept in a very condensed moment of time.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is one of the strengths of it. And I think that, your point you made there about coaching is also really important, that the best teachers, I think, of anything in life, and particularly parkour, are not necessarily the ones who have the most amazing technique or whatever, but they're in some ways the ones that understand this kind of thing. So they've been through those processes themselves, psychologically, so they know those stages. They know the territory. They've walked that terrain themselves. They haven't just read about it, and they've actually walked the terrain. So
and they've made the mistakes. They've gone on all the sides of that line that you're walking, so they know, like when they see you drift to one side or the other, they can tell you, okay, this is what's going to happen. They can make you understand. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, for me, I've always think about it in terms of if you were going to hire a guide to take you, into a forest or across a wilderness, you would want to hire a guide that had walked that wilderness or that forest before. You'd want someone that that they've been there and back. You wouldn't want someone that had just studied the maps a lot, So that's why I think that coaches should go through that process of training, and they should have to go through those very difficult challenges and those very, in a way, psychologically stressful experiences, so that they understand that territory, and they can then explain it to other people and help guide them through it safely.
Yeah, exactly. And so in the end, like you're coaching jumps and things like this, but you're coaching so much more. Like you're coaching a process, you're coaching a mindset. And that's what takes time to build. Like you can learn jumps very quickly. Nowadays, there's people in 6 months, they do things that I could never do ever. But like it takes years to understand the whole process, understand the whole mindset.
Yeah. And that's the worrying thing is that you get those sort of people that will do that small amount of training, and then start thinking, I'm going to teach this stuff, and they start teaching the shell. They teach the outline, the outside of parkour, the shell of it, without any real true understanding of the nature of it. I think that's a big it's a real shame, I think, and people studying under them or learning from them will not be able to learn those things. So I think it's that's why coaching is such a big responsibility, and why people should make sure they really, really know what they're doing before they start teaching. It's not just like, I'm a teacher. So no, you have to have earned that right. And I really believe that. I still believe that if you're going to teach anything, you should have earned the right to teach it by walking that path yourself.
Yeah, it goes far further than just the skills you're teaching. There's much more in it than just jumps or just movement,
Exactly. Yes.
You're taking people on a journey. So like, as you said, you need to have gone on that journey yourself. You need to have gone to the end of that journey pretty much, in order to have something to really teach, to have content.
So I'm gonna change the tack slightly to another element of your life and training, which maybe people don't know about very much. But all this training you did in parkour, and your adventures and pushing yourself, and then you went and you chose to do military training, special forces training in France, right?
Yeah.
Did your parkour training, your parkour background, did that help you in that training? And why did you do that training? Why did you choose to go and do the special forces training, which obviously is going to be tough anyway, right? That's for a start. That's going to be tough. So how was that experience? Did your parkour help you? And why did you do it?
So I'll start with the why. That was around the time that I had this kind of mental breakdown with parkour. After that, I spent some time like not really knowing what I would do with my life, and didn't want to coach anymore. Didn't really want to do things like this. So I was living in the south of France, in the Pyrenees. I have a family home there. I was just living there. And and I don't know, I decided to go at the army office, recruiting office. And because they do tests, they test everything physically, mentally, psychologically, what they want to know who you are basically. And then they kind of tell you, okay, maybe you could be like whatever, a soldier in this kind of thing, or maybe you could drive a tank or whatever, like based on those tests. So I was kind of curious more than anything else. And also I was seeing it as maybe like, why not the army? It would be like going on a trip or something, like a new adventure of some kind. It would be something temporary. I wouldn't want to stay there for ages, but it would be, yeah, a new way to push myself in something different than what I've been pushing myself in. So I went to do the test, and I got some really good results. And at the same time, I met a guy there who was also doing the test, and who said, "Oh yeah, I'm trying to enlist for the special forces." I thought, "Oh, that's cool. So what do you need to do for that?" And he said, "You just pass the test, and if you're good enough, then maybe they'll hire you." So I thought, "Oh, that's interesting." So I passed the test. I had good results, and I said, "Yeah, maybe I'd like to do special forces if it's if I can, like if it's open." And they said, "Yeah, you passed the test, so you could do it if you want." And then there was a series of.
What was the test? Give us a little bit of detail about the test.
It was so it's the general thing that everyone does when they go to the army. So they test you physically. You do like a little obstacle course where you have to balance and do some pull-ups and do whatever, all kinds of physical things just to see how you are. You have to throw some things and things like this for your coordination and strength and all that,
So this you breezed through because of your parkour training. So an obstacle
Yeah,
for you is going to be like
pretty easy.
easy.
But it's not so much that it's easy or hard. It's just like how well you do on it, because it's kind of open-ended,
Right.
Like for the pull-ups, you just do as many pull-ups as you can. So so that makes the difference, really, like they want the best they're gonna select the best. A lot of people apply for the special forces. They only hire, like when I was there, it was 60 people a year. So that's not a lot considering how many people want to apply for it all the time,
How many pull-ups did you do?
I think it was, I have to say it was really strict pull-ups. We had to go completely down and then completely up with your chin, not like this, but like this, I think I did 27.
In one set. It's not bad. It's not bad.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then they test you psychologically. Like they ask you questions. Like you're on a computer, and there's questions that appear, and you answer A, B, C, or D. Like if you're in this situation, would you react more like this, more like that, more like this, more like that? And you select. So just to see your psychology, and then there's tests for reason, like how well you're able to reason, to think. Like they show you cubes, and you have to kind of in your mind flip them around to know the pattern on the cube. Does it correspond to the pattern that's there? Like which cube corresponds to the pattern that's there, things like this. You have to move stuff in your mind.
Yep.
You have speed tests, like how fast you can analyze things and click at the right place and stuff like this. So all this kind of stuff. And then they have a result, like a diagram that makes no sense to you because you cannot read it, but it makes a lot of sense to them. And then there's a series of interviews. So it's not just like, did you do well on the test, but do you have the mindset that they want for that kind of job? And what they want is someone who's not really gonna be big mouth or anything like that. They don't want the smartest guy in the room. They want someone who kind of looks normal, who kind of behaves kind of low key. Like the big talkative, best of the best. They're not gonna go in the special forces. They're gonna go in standard regiments.
Yeah, stand out too much. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And they want people who kind of doubt themselves a little bit. The right amount. Not too sure of themselves. Like not I'm gonna be on top of this. I'm the best. But they don't want that. So yeah, they interview you like 3 times or something, and then finally they make their selection. And I was lucky enough to be selected. And so the parkour training, it helped and it didn't help at the same time, because mentally it was a big help. I had been through a lot of challenges with parkour, so it definitely helped to go through all the stuff I went through there. But when you're in special forces, basically you need to be able to walk long distances and to have good cardio and to be able to carry heavy stuff. And all this I had not really done so much at that time. Like carrying heavy stuff, I was not used to it at all. So when you start having to carry around a bag with 60 kilos on it, which is pretty much my weight, it's super hard.
Right. Yeah.
And the hiking, I hadn't done so much hiking. I'd done a lot of cycling, but yeah, I wasn't used to that kind of stuff. So that was pretty hard. That was the hardest part for me, all the hiking with heavy loads.
And what did you take away from that training? What did you learn from it that was useful?
Well, there's a lot of skills that are pretty cool, like learning to use weapons and things like this, and like tactical stuff, how to move around, and and not be seen, like when you're in a group, and all the procedures that you have when you're moving around in a group and stuff like this. Little things about hiding yourself, camouflaging yourself, things like this are really cool. All these little skills that you learn that are related to the army in general, and even more so to the special forces. All this, I guess, is what I enjoyed the most. But like, as I was going through the month of training, I was realizing more and more that I just didn't want to be like going and killing people and stuff like this. As much as I enjoyed the adventurous side of it and learning all the cool skills and all that, I realized also the more real it was becoming, the less I was seeing myself in it,
Yeah.
So that's why I ended up leaving. And also because like you can easily injure yourself there, not just because you get shot or anything, but just from all the hard training. They don't really care in the army whether you come out strong at the end of your service, they're gonna use you basically. So if you have a messed up knee or a bad back by the end of it, they don't care. It's not the parkour mindset of you have to be strong and you have to, they don't care about that. Like just lift the bag and just go hike and that's it, don't complain.
Okay.
So there's this culture of it, like, yeah, don't complain, just get the job done, which is cool to some extent. But also to another extent, it's not that cool because it just breaks you at some point, so it wasn't.
They're not thinking in terms of long-term health, kind of longevity. They don't really care about that. Yeah, because they know there's another 1,000 people outside who the next generation who sign up and
exactly. And you see a lot of the instructors that I had, they were messed up. Like some had really bad backs and they could like barely crouch down or anything like this. Some had PTSD from all the horrors that they've done or seen. I didn't want that, I really didn't want that. So that's also one of the reasons why I left.
And then you obviously found firefighting, which is what you do now.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a better fit for who you are. Yeah,
I guess so. It's less an elite thing now because I'm not even in the Paris firefighters, which are the elite in France of firefighters. I'm just in the standard fire station thing. So it's not as elitist as the army, the special forces were, where everyone was super sharp and like always like everything was really intense and hard and blah 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 and very demanding. Like here it's a lot more relaxed. So when I arrived into that, it was kind of weird at the beginning. Like I wasn't used to being so relaxed. Like you have a lunch break and things like this. Well, what's a lunch break, So yeah, but I mean now it's fine because it's not the center of my life. I enjoy climbing, I enjoy traveling, and so I don't need to put all my efforts into my job. Basically, I'm spreading it out in other fields. So it's the right balance. It's not too intense, but there's still some action, if you will, like interesting stuff happening, situations where you have to think fast and react fast and react the right way. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, I would say it's the perfect fit for me.
And you're doing a lot of climbing. So you're climbing every day. You live in Fontainebleau, one of the sort of bouldering hotspots of the world.
Yeah, it's the birthplace pretty much of bouldering,
which is
in the world.
amazing. So you get to climb, every day in a beautiful place. And you don't compete or anything like that, do you, in
No,
climbing? And have you never been tempted to compete, or it's just something that doesn't interest you at all?
no. Well, first of all, competitions are mainly indoors, and I never climb indoors. I just climb in the forest on the boulders. I climb barefoot, so when you compete, you have to compete in shoes and climbing shoes. So, and I've never been interested in comparing myself to others. It really brings nothing to me at all. Even with parkour, it was like that. That's not the purpose of parkour. Like, you train with people, and if someone does something and you want to do it too, but it's not really a competition in that sense. You're not trying to be better than them. You're just like motivated by what you see, basically. So there's no benefit for me in going to do competitions with climbing or with anything else. It's
So what
about
is
bettering myself, not really comparing myself to others.
right? So that is the benefit you get out of it. It's just self-improvement. Is it the same as? Do you get the same out of it as you got out of when you were doing more regular parkour training? Is it just an
Um,
evolution of that, or because I know you were doing both at the same time? So
yeah. Parkour was a lot more demanding mentally and even physically. Like, you need to have um, this general view of what you're doing when you do parkour, I think, more than with climbing. With climbing, there's a boulder, you climb it, that's it. With parkour, you have to be creative, you have to see the challenges, you have to re-explore the places where you've already trained a million times and see them in a different light. It's a lot more demanding, and also parkour is a lot more psychological. You go through all these mindsets of anger, despair, whatever, everything, incredible joy. All this is so intense in so many ways with parkour, and climbing is not like that at all, or maybe a little bit, but really not compared to parkour.
mm.
So in that sense, climbing is a lot easier than parkour. You just go to the forest, just climb, and everything is like all the climbs. You have guidebooks with all the climbs listed and the difficulty of each climb. So you don't really need to think. Like, if my level is a 7B, then I'm gonna look for something that's 7B or 7C, maybe, to challenge myself. And I don't need to be creative like I was in parkour, like to find new things or anything like that. So in that sense, it's pretty chill, pretty relaxed. You just show up and do the work, and that's it. You don't need to think so much about it, and you don't
So
need to go through all these mindsets.
So to come full circle, are you now not worried that you're back in a comfort zone?
Ah, that's a good one.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Ah.
Thomas is gonna be like, "Fuck! I need to go out and do some crazy adventure."
I mean, to some extent, yeah. I mean,
Or is this part of the balance? Like having achieved that kind of balanced mindset now, the sort of enlightenment in training type thing. I don't want to say you're enlightened because you're definitely not. But
yeah.
is this part of that? You feel more balanced, therefore you don't need necessarily to push
Yeah.
yourself as hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the reasons for training parkour to begin with was for reassurance, to like gain confidence. As I said before. So once you've gained that confidence, then it's there. You don't need to keep on reassuring yourself constantly. Like, so I'm a lot more relaxed in that sense. There's not. I used to have this sense of urgency, like I need to accomplish certain things. I need to have done really cool jumps. I need to have done crazy travels and all this. And now I've done all these things. Like, of course, I could still keep pushing myself in parkour and travels, like go bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. But I don't see it like this. Like, I don't think this is the way to go. I think it's more about balance, finding that balance in your life, and that's where I'm headed right now. I'm still pushing myself. I'm still putting myself in uncomfortable situations and learning to deal with them and learning new things. But it's not as before. Like I've done that work already. You know, I don't need to keep on doing it constantly. Now I can kind of enjoy all that I've done. You know, enjoy the results of all that I've achieved. And now all this that I've learned, all this mindset, all these processes that I've gone through, all these lessons that I've learned, they're here with me, and I am applying them in everything I do, in climbing, in my life in general. And it's pretty nice. I mean, it's like learning to play an instrument. You know, you go through all the work, and it's painstaking. It's really annoying sometimes, frustrating. But then at some point, you can play that instrument, and it looks so easy. It look like to people, it looks so natural, and to you, it feels so natural. You pick up your guitar, whatever it is, and just play. You don't need to think about it. You can have a conversation at the same time because it's so in you now. It's such a part of you, and that's how I feel with all these things I've done with travels, with parkour, and now it's in me, and I'm just applying it naturally. I'm not really stressing about it, and I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the whole process of it.
Super cool, man. That's really cool. It's a great attitude to life, a great approach, and a great thing to have learned, a great cycle to have gone through, and to have come to that realization at a relatively young age. Because you're how old are you now? You're still pretty young, right?
I'm 35.
Okay, so you're a kid still. So
yeah, compared to you, yeah.
to achieve that is pretty. Although you did lose in the parkour Olympics, but you know we won't go to that.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it's not about competition.
It is to you, apparently.
Hey, to you, you're the one that refuses to accept that you lost. But we're not.
We're talking about.
we're not going to that. But no, I mean that's a good realization to come to, man, at a young age. So you know, I think that's very cool. And what's the, you know, if you were going to have a message to give to the people listening and watching, and to the parkour community now, maybe people starting in parkour now, what's the message you would give to them with all your experience? What's the kind of the one message that you think is the most important?
I would say, why did you get into it in the first place? And are you still practicing it with that in mind, with that mindset, with that same mindset? Like when you got into parkour, what questions was it answering? What void was it filling for you? And are you still into that? Is it still filling that void? Or have you switched on to some sort of obsessive thing of, I need to get better, I need results, I need to compete against others, I need to do this jump that this other guy did? Or, you know, usually when we start practicing something, it's because it brings us something. It fills a void. And a lot of people talk about this feeling of freedom when they start doing parkour. You know, you hear a lot. And we kind of sometimes lose this on the way. We kind of lose track because we fall in love with our obsession. You know, we love it so much. We love training so much that we start making it this really stiff thing that we need to do, you know, like the really regimented thing, like okay, now I'm gonna train this many hours every week, or I'm gonna train 3 times or 4 times a week, or I'm gonna have these results, and I'm gonna plan to have these results in the future. You know, we start to make it this whole machine like that we're feeding, you know, that needs to keep going. It's not, we lose track of the purity of why we got into it in the first place, you know, that void that it was filling. So yeah, my advice would be like, what void was it filling when you started? And are you still in that mindset? If not, maybe you want to think about it and get back into that, because otherwise you're missing out on the whole process, and the whole process is what matters the most, not so much the result.
Powerful stuff, man. Powerful stuff. So if people want to connect with you, how can they do it? Is there a way to connect with the elusive Thomas Des Bois, or is he just, that's it, stuff shit, he's hidden in the forest and you can never talk to him?
Yeah, not really. I mean, I have a climbing channel on YouTube. That's about it.
So you have a climbing channel. You did used to do a blog, and we've had a question from Alberto, who asks, why did you stop your blog?
Well, I started posting stuff, like making little articles outside of my blog, and I just didn't keep on putting stuff on the blog. I mean, it's still there, it's still alive, so I could, if I do some other trip, maybe I'll do it. I guess it became more practical to just send updates to people and, with WhatsApp and stuff like this, and rather than have a blog.
Right. So it was a communication tool rather than a kind of.
Yeah, I guess so.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, I've had other people telling me that they want to see the blog again. So maybe if I do another chip, I'll do that.
And what's your climbing channel on YouTube so that people can
It's
find it?
It's called Thomas Barefoot Climber.
Thomas Barefoot Climber.
Yeah.
All right, cool. And lastly, why Thomas Des Bois? You have two names. Everyone knows you're either Thomas Couetdic or Thomas Des Bois. Why are you called Thomas Des Bois? And what does it mean for the non-francophiles out there?
Yeah, it's a nickname I got from some of the guys in the Lisses guys when I was training back in the day. Just because I was always like when we would go to Fontainebleau to do some training there, we would go from Lisses to Fontainebleau because of the boulders. I was always enjoying climbing on the trees and everything, and I guess I don't know, it's just from there and from my love of being outside in the nature and like adventures and stuff like this. Like even before I was doing all the travels, I was already a little bit adventurous in that way. I love to sleep outside and things like this. So I guess it comes from that.
Thomas of the Woods.
Yeah.
It's a great name. I mean, it's super fitting, man. It's a really fitting name for you. I think it's very appropriate for a wild adventurer like yourself. So long may you keep it. And yeah, I mean, it's been really good to talk to you and get your views and your experiences. I think that's going to be really useful for a lot of people, whether they train parkour or not. Just just hearing what you've experienced, what you've learned from your life and your adventures, I think is really cool, because you've pushed yourself to limits that most people never do. And anyone who does that has lessons they can share. So I think that's really useful. So thank you very much for your time, Thomas. I'm sure everyone will join me in saying thank you very much to Thomas Couetdic for his time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was really nice. It was really cool.
Well, I'm sure we will get you back again at some stage, maybe to do one of the group discussions we're going to do with some of the other Lisses traceurs, just to get everyone in a room and reminisce about old times and stupid stories. So I'm sure we'll have you back in the future.
Yeah, it'd be nice.
And thank you everyone for joining and for listening. The people watching live on Facebook or the people in the webinar. If we didn't get your question, I tried to weave the questions into the questions I asked that we got from people. But if we didn't get to your question, sorry, we only have limited time and there's a lot to ask a guy like Thomas. So we've been here for about 90 minutes, which is pretty spot on timing wise. So thank you very much for listening, everyone. We'll be back in a short time with another amazing guest. This, if you missed part of it, this will go out on YouTube and Facebook as well. We'll put it up there so you can watch it at your leisure, or watch it again if you want to glean more of Thomas's wisdom. So don't worry if you missed part of it or had to go out and make tea. Other than that, stay safe, keep training, and follow Thomas's YouTube channel for his climbing adventures, and we will look forward.
It'll be boring for most people, I suppose.
I'm sure it's fascinating, man. So I'm going to check it out myself. Yeah, we will see you all again soon. So thank you very much, Thomas.
Thank you. It was really nice. Thank you very much.
All right, we are out.
Cool.